to transition.
Here is the counter again, the step through the shot, another shot, and there it is! Game over, Sayward FC, as Brendan Lambie scores the game winner.
Brendan Lambie's a right-footed player. He's going for that bottom corner, and I think that's more down to being under so much pressure if you're the U.S. women's team. And when this ball ricochet, it's so unlucky.
Here's a turnover. Jarvis, there it is. Game over. 12-0, Wrexham defeats the U.S. women. And Wrexham just proved to be too tough for this team.
You never know what can happen. Harris here with the ball at her feet, and she's pressured, and that'll be it. Como 1907 knew the job they had to do coming in here. What a treat put on for these two fan bases, two of the best fan bases we've had at this tournament.
Now, for those of you who've been following this channel for a while, you know that we've been following the U.S. women's national team and their fight for equal pay. Now, to keep a long story short, they went to court, said they weren't being paid equal to the men. Court came back and said, no, you're not being paid equal to the men. You're actually being paid more than the men, and the court threw out their lawsuit. Now, even with those realities, the women's national team still continued to lie to the press and pretend that they weren't getting paid more than the men, which the court documents showed they absolutely were. Now, the two main arguments against essentially giving the women extra money just because they're women were that the finances didn't make sense. For instance, the Men's World Cup brought in $5.36 billion. So obviously the men are taking a cut of that $5.36 billion, while the Women's World Cup only brought in about $131 million. So the women were demanding equal pay, but only bringing in a fraction of what the men were bringing in at the World Cup. Then the second argument was that the competition level at the Women's World Cup was not the same level of competition as it was with the Men's World Cup. Here is former CNN host Don Lemon calling it out.
Men's tournament brings in more money, but when it comes to the U.S., I'd make the argument that the women's team is far more responsible for the boost in popularity and stuff.
All right, I would make the exact opposite argument. I know everyone's going to hate me.
Go ahead.
But the men's team makes more money. If they make more money, then they should get more money.
Why does the men's team?
The men's team makes more money because because people are more interested in it.
But guess who? But if they are blocked in so many ways and not invested in as much,
guys are,
they don't even have a. I know you're not, but they don't even have a shot.
I grew up the only boy in a family of all women. I understand what you're saying, but not everybody, honestly, has the same skill. Not everybody has the same interest in the sport. I think the women should be paid more. I do. But if the men...
You're right that not everyone has the same skills because the women are better skilled.
Well, the women are better skilled against other women. But if the women played the men, they wouldn't be winning the way that they win.
So U.S. Soccer, even though they won the lawsuit, eventually caved and said, hey, we're going to give the women's national team all this extra money, even though they don't bring in as much money, and even though we know that the game is not as good as the men's game. That's just a fact. Now, the women's national team said, we're going to prove that assumption wrong. We're going to prove that we can play with the men. Now, a couple of years ago, the women's national team played against the FC Dallas under-15 boys squad and lost. They lost 5-2 to this team of under 15-year-old boys. So when they competed against not men but boys, they lost 5-2. Here's what CBS reported. In preparation for two upcoming friendlies against Russia, the U.S. women's national team played the FC Dallas under-15 boys academy team on Sunday and fell 5-2, according to FC Dallas's official website. The friendly came as the U.S. looked to tune up before taking on Russia on Thursday night in a friendly. So the women's national team gets their butts kicked in by 15-year-old boys. Let me be clear. 15 and under year old boys. And now they're saying that they want to play with the men. Now, this is not a one-off occasion. For instance, the Australian women's national team, who's ranked number 5 in the world, they also lost to a group of 15-year-old boys. It was a little worse for them. They lost 7-0. Check this out.
Just further to the debate about whether the professional
would
ladies
beat the
football
men.
teams, the international ones, could beat men's teams. It's been sent a story here from the Evening Standard. This was 2 years ago. The Australian women's national team, who were ranked number 5 in the world at the time,
Outstanding, yeah.
lost 7-0 to a team of 15-year-old boys.
Awkward.
Now, before you start trying to cancel me, I'm not saying anything that's controversial. Men have physical advantages over women. That's why we segregate women's sports and men's sports. It's the simple fact. Here's an example for you. Let's look at a sport like running. The fastest woman to ever run 100 meters is FloJo, and her time was 10 seconds, 0.49, and that was in 1998. The fastest woman ever to run that race. Where the fastest man, Usain Bolt, is at 9 seconds, 0.58, and he ran that in 2009. So now my question to you, where do you think FloJo, the fastest woman ever to run the 100-meter dash, where she would rank amongst the men? So here is the official ranking for the 100 meters, and as you can see, FloJo is number 1 with her time of 10.49 seconds, the fastest woman ever in the history of the world to run 100 meters. So now here are the men's ranking. Usain Bolt, he's number 1 with his 9.58 seconds. If we just take FloJo's time and placed her on the men's chart, she would be tied for 7,090th place. Think about that. Over 7,000 men have run faster times than the fastest woman in the history of the sport. That is what we call the gender gap in sports. So with all of this knowledge, the U.S. women's national team entered this TST $1 million winner-take-all competition. Now, this is a 7-on-7 soccer series that allows you to get whatever team you want to get, enter the tournament, and if you win, you get $1 million, winner-take-all. And here are the teams that are playing. Now, in this tournament, you have former players from men's teams, former players from women's teams. You have them all here. But one thing is unique with the U.S. women's team. They are all female team. So they're saying we are going to win, or we can compete in this tournament with mostly men with an all-women's team. Now, the U.S. women's team featured World Cup winner Heather O'Reilly, and it was coached by U.S. women's national team legend Mia Hamm. Now, the U.S. side featured many former U.S. women's national team players, some current players, and this was not the top women's national team. Remember, those are the ones that lost to the 15-year-old boys. But this was a team of certain players who had some World Cup experience and were trying to have some international experience. So they entered the tournament with the goal of showing that this all-women's team can compete with all men's teams and maybe even win this tournament. So the first game was against the all-men's team of Say Word. And the women's team did well. They got 4 shots on goal, while the men's team got 18 shots on goal. And the women's national team lost 5-0. The men's team got more goals than the U.S. women's team got shots on goal. So they weren't even able to shoot 5 shots on goal, while the men's team actually made 5 shots on goal. Then game 2, the women's national team had to play against the Wrexham Red Dragons. This is a team owned by Ryan Reynolds. And they didn't hold back because they're playing for $1 million. So they handsomely defeated the women's national team by a score of 12-0. Now, again, in this game, the women's team only got 4 shots on goal, while the men's team got 31 shots on goal. So think about this for this particular game. The women only got 4 attempts to make goals. 4, that's it. While the men's team scored 12 goals on 31 attempts. Matter of fact, they scored 1 out of every 3 shots. The men's team scored on 1 out of every 3 shots they took. Crazy. So then the women's team played the mixed team of Como 1907. Now, Como 1907 does have some women who are playing, but it's predominantly a men's team. Now, this time they only got 3 shots on goal, but they made one of them, while the men's team, or the mixed team, got 20 shots on goal. And that game ended 7-1. And think about this. The men's team in each one of these games scored more goals than the women's team even attempted shots on goal. So that means that in this game where they've got 7 goals, the women just were able to shoot only 3 shots on goal. So even if they made all their shots, they would have still lost by 4 goals. Now in total, the women's team lost 24 goals to 1. Now, this was an utter embarrassment. I think this put to bed the fallacy that the soccer that men play and the soccer that women play are equal in the competitive sense. And this is why trans women, or biological men, are dominating in women's sports. See, men have an unfair advantage because men go through male puberty. This increases muscle density, strength, reaction time, lung capacity, and bone density. And the bottom line is men have these physical advantages over women, especially professional athletes, and they just can't be overcome by wishful thinking. So I want to throw the question to you. What do you think about this whole thing? Now, the women's team was utterly destroyed, but do you think the women's national team, their argument that they are just as good as the men's team, do you think that's based in reality, or is that just nonsense that they're speaking to try to, again, fool the public in thinking that they are just as good as the men's national team? Who do you think would win a scrimmage between the U.S. men's team and the U.S. women's team? Because the women's team lost to 15-year-old boys, and I don't think the men's team would have lost to those 15-year-old boys. But let me know in the comments section. Let me know if you think I'm being too hard on the women's national team, because I think this display puts to bed any notion that the women's national team could compete in the Men's World Cup. We know that's just not true. And them pretending that they could and pretending they should be being paid as if they were competing in the Men's World Cup, I think is utterly nonsense. But I could be wrong. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section. My name is Nate the Lawyer, and I'll see you in the next one.